Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the Dream Academy because I recently spoke to Gilbert Gabriel to find out more about life, love and poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Anyway, this is the interview, and just also to say that he did more than just the Dream Academy, but you're going to find out more about that in this fascinating interview. So, after several minutes of quality, interesting chat, which we edited out, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Gilbert, it's over to you.
Yeah, it's basically the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles was the world in the 60s, and it's completely responsible for me, my career and my interest in life, basically.
Right.
It was our internet, basically. They did everything by proxy for us. Yes,
interesting times. Because I think you're just a little bit older than me. So did you have an experience of the 60s during your childhood? Was any of it? Did any of it sort of come into your awareness?
Well, it's very weird, actually. I had like a single parent. I seem to remember being in a place in Kent called Who, and my mother asked me to go and buy some crisps, like the off license at the time. And I heard, I think, I want to hold your hand or something like that. And that was one of those epiphany moments, like Eureka.
Yes.
I just love this. I love the kind of harmonies that are going on. I want to kind of do this. And then from there on, it was just a question of I ended up at Sexy's Grammar School in Bruton. And just as you were talking about Bowie, etc., they were part of the fabric, but it was also people like Fleetwood Mac, Green, Manalishi, and I still remember I Am the Walrus and stuff, because we go on these Sunday walks where we go and visit the girls' school. And it was an intrinsic part of our kind of education. And I took up the piano and I started always buying bits of sheet music to like play the Beatles songs or whatever bands that were around at the time. But I totally relate to you talking about Bowie, etc. I mean, we kind of thought it was the end of the world when the Beatles split up, but then there was this kind of like renaissance, and subsequently, working with like David Gilmour with the Pink Floyd and stuff, I realised, like reading about the Pink Floyd, that they went into Abbey Road after the Beatles, so they kind of took up the mantle.
Yes,
and then you kind of look back at kind of independent songwriters like Elton John and David Bowie, and you realise that they were kind of Beatles in one person, or maybe two people in Elton John's case, but definitely David Bowie. It's quite amazing how.
Yeah. Did you feel that you got to that age during the kind of late 60s, very early 70s, when the Beatles broke up, and then you had the death of Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Brian Jones the year before? Did it feel like, oh my God, we're just about to go into that great period of being a sort of older teenager, and it feels like, the 60s, the party has gone rather badly here, and it's not going to be the same again, just as we're about to have our moment?
Yes, it feels like that. It feels like that with the world at the moment, actually. It feels like 3 or 4 years ago, we didn't know how lucky we were. And now, COVID, the war, and the kind of crash in the market. I mean, it's quite weird how cyclic it is. But looking back at the 70s and the 80s, I guess, for songwriting, I mean, there's Joni Mitchell and there's Carole King and, there's Bowie. I mean, there's such a proliferation of amazing kind of talent. And even though I love technology, it's maybe some point I'll take a photograph of my studio with all the junk that I've got in it. But somehow pre-internet, people, with guitars, pianos, etc., and their minds and creativity and lots of optimism were amazing. So somehow it feels like, even though we like to think of decades being cut into cultural kind of compartments, I think there was a kind of bleed really from the 60s to probably the early 70s, maybe 72, 73.
Yes, it probably was. Did you come from a musical family? Were your parents at all?
My mother always used to sing around the house, and then our grandmother was one of those old kind of opera, sort of popular opera companies that did Gilbert and Son, I think, sort of some Carlo opera or something like that. Yeah.
So were you being slightly hot housed? Did you have sort of musical talent that they thought, this kid could go far, we need to sort of push him?
It was kind of like encouraged. It was. I mean, we had like musicals, and I had my own school band, and they said, "Do you want some piano lessons?" at the age of 10. And it was all around me, and I was in the choir as well, and I sang all the parts from soprano to bass as I grew up, So it was all around me, even though there wasn't actually a conventional music course at my school. I had to go to Yeovil Technical College and sort of, take various substances before I got myself in the right condition to go to Dartington College of Arts, where I studied classical piano, and was exposed to Steve Reich, Philip Glass, and lots of lunatics. That was the kind of blueprint, I think, for the Dream Academy. I kind of based the Dream Academy's vision of kind of being community-based and interested in a lot of eclectic artists.
Yes.
Yes.
So did you, because I've got an older brother who's 7 years older. He was very into prog rock. So I was a bit obsessed because I thought he was wonderful. So I got into the, Yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, all those sort of people. Did they come into your consciousness? Because obviously with that kind of music.
Very much. I mean, I went to Bristol Colston, I think, Hall in 1970, I think, and 72, and I saw Genesis with Peter Gabriel. And I still remember there was a track called More For Me, and Phil Collins was on drums singing harmonies with him. I was thinking, God, what a wonderful voice he's got. And what was amazing about Genesis, it was like kind of cinema, really, because all their equipment was painted, I think, white. And when they projected things on the stage, it wasn't that typical kind of Marshall amps and sort of, grungy metal kind of thing. It was like going to cinema or theatre. So it completely entranced me, and I loved Yes as well. Yeah, I loved all those progressive bands, really, Focus, etc. Yeah.
Yes, Hocus Pocus.
Yes, exactly.
No, he had all them, but he also, bizarrely, this was kind of probably early to mid 70s, but he did also have Sgt. Pepper and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and at the time there was no kind of cultural context, and I remember being really obsessed with those two records, especially the last track on side 4 of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which was called Harmony, and then also Good Morning by the Beatles, which was on Sgt. Pepper. And I thought they were just the most amazing songs lyrically, and they were so beautifully crafted. So that had a big kind of impact, really. At the same time, my mum used to play radio too, so I got really into the Carpenters and Burt Bacharach and stuff like that, which I still think is amazing today. So it all kind of fed in.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I think from the age of about 10, I had a transistor radio glued to my ear permanently as much as I could, and that would go on to 2 in the morning, like listening to Radio Caroline and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So how did you navigate that kind of interesting world of glam, with Bowie and what he was doing, with this slightly muso kind of prog world, which definitely wasn't sort of so sexually fluid and sort of experimental in that way?
It's quite amusing, actually. I've got a friend called Wayne Ricketts that got us some tickets to go and see Mark Bolan in, I think it was either Poole or Bournemouth. And I reluctantly went. And then in retrospect, having like the Dream Academy got signed to Prince's management, and I saw him 3 times, I thought he was like the kind of blueprint, really, for Prince, like Mark Bolan. It was amazing. And it was amazing to see the kind of girl fans and the kind of shrieking, and he was a consummate performer. Yeah, it was an amazing experience in retrospect. But at the time, there was a kind of snobbery amongst my fraternity of like proggers, and he was just a mere, little figure of entertainment.
Yes. Well, I would imagine, we look back at Bowie with great sort of like seriousness now, and we study him in great detail. But at the time, he must have just been a bit of an... Yes, people probably didn't take him that seriously. Who had been into people like the Doors and Jimi Hendrix and sort of the heavier bands with, Jeff Beck in, and then you had this Bowie-esque character or Ziggy, character that I would imagine it just looked very frivolous. And my brother wouldn't even have a 7-inch single in his, record collection because it was not proper music. It was too frivolous. So I just think that Bowie, a lot of fans must have just ignored him at the time, thinking, yeah, this is just bubblegum pop, and it's disposable. And then it's like, oh no, actually it's a bit more than the sweet, he's got a bit more substance to him.
Yes, yeah, totally concur with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes. So as the 70s progressed, and it's kind of a complex decade that had, started with people like, Middle of the Road and Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep and those things. Then punk came along. How did you navigate that kind of 76, 77 period?
Well, that's quite funny, actually, because I was at Dartington Arts College then. I think I started in 76, and I became social sector in 77. And I learnt to my cost that punk existed. I think I remember the Jubilee and everybody being kind of into punk. And at the time, I did have a friend called Bill who believed that he was a white witch, and he turned me on to lots of people like kind of Ian Jury, and we went to gigs to see the Damned, etc. And at the same time, I was going to Exeter University to see bands like Procol Harum and Utopia with Todd Rundgren, etc. So it's quite a duality in my existence. But I was like hoovering it all up. And I remember putting on this, at the time, I think what was great for musicians and people, for artists to develop, was all these college tours. So, for about 800 quid or £1,000, you could book a band. So I remember that I booked a band called O that probably no one ever will know or remember in the future. And they were a prog band. And I think it was on Jubilee night they played in the canteen at Dartington, and there was like hardly anybody there because the whole kind of zeitgeist had changed into the kind of punk thing. But then I remember there was a friend of mine got a single from OMD that I heard. And then I started to feel that there was some weird kind of strange electronic music that I didn't quite understand, but was kind of quite pleasant to listen to. And I think that became integral. I think when I was like with Nick in the early days, we were like interested in kind of OMD because it was that, kind of electronic, and obviously you've got the kind of Human League, etc. And we kind of realized that there was a way to do it that wasn't necessarily four on the floor. So all the kind of artistic kind of experiences and madness that I had, and Nick's kind of prowess with having a band called The Act that I joined, and we'd had a lot of fun going on little tours in Spain. It was a kind of cross-pollination of the best of both of them, really. I think the idea of songs and harmony and electronics and experimentation. And now I kind of fondly look back, as I've just been endorsed by Roland to buy a Jupiter Jupiter X at a good price, which is my favorite keyboard. The Jupiter 8, which I use quite a lot. I kind of think that, it was almost in the 80s, this evolution as new synthesizers came out. It was every 1 or 2 years you'd buy a new one for about £2,000, and then you go through all the presets and you just try and understand that new synthesizer. Whereas now on a daily basis, there's probably hundreds of bits of software that does a lot of this. But
yes.
But in a way, I'm trying to remember, lots of information, but there was a musician recently ruing over the fact that he only had something like a Prophet and no, it was a Moog Prodigy and one other synthesizer, and he had to learn it inside out basically to be creative. And he feels that people are kind of spoilt, with the amount of software at the moment, and obviously autotune, etc. That kind of restricts the individual independent imagination. And
yes,
bemoaning the kind of the way that records sound now. And I kind of agree with him.
Did you feel a little bit, not worried, but did you feel like you weren't going to, when you realised what the musical zeitgeist was, that you were at that age, did it feel like, actually, I'm not quite part of the sort of this musical punk scene that...
Yeah, well, it was, in a way, it was a double hammer because I was studying classical piano at the time. So it was like, Debussy and Mozart and Bach, and being incredibly focused on musicality. And so you go to a sort of Damned concert and you see the bass player and then all pretty sort of pissed up, etc. And you think, not sure if this is the career that I want. Yes.
Yes. It was strange. I mean, there must have been a lot of bands who were just about to say, right, we're here, with the long hair and the, flared denims and sort of that kind of look that had been around for a few years, like when you look at the Old Grey Whistle Test and lots of hairy men doing guitar solos, and they must have been, and they were fine, the Eagles, because they were already there, but the bands who would just come in and say, right, we're here, and then suddenly the Sex Pistols and the Damn and the Clash appeared, it must have been like, oh, we're probably just going to leave the room now, aren't we? Because it's just, this isn't what you want to listen to at all. But yes, it's all about timing, as I heard from various musicians. So as we trucked on to the late 70s, Thatcher gets in, so then suddenly, the political landscape changes, and then the early 80s we have the Falkland crisis, Greenham Common, the miners' strike, huge amount of unemployment. So there's a lot of bands that I've interviewed have all done. I mean, it's such a cliche, isn't it? But the Job Seekers Alliance, Enterprise Alliance schemes, and then sort of being in a band as something to do, and then that kind of narrative of often getting a single. John Peel plays it. John Peel session. Oh, first album. Get the tour. Like the Transit Band goes around all the little art centres for their indie nights on a Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday. So what was it like when you rolled into the 80s?
Well, that's when I moved up to London, and it was kind of reluctantly the third year of the course that I could do was like teacher training. And now that I live down like in Totnes in Devon, it's always quite strange because when I go along the railway, I see a parallel college that I should have gone to, which was Exmouth Royal College, for the last year to do teachers training. And I didn't choose that destiny. I decided to come to London, went to Trent Park. And I remember buying a Roland amp out of my grant and then just playing with lots of different bands. And it was like quite austere. You know, I was like playing with a jazz band at the Africa Centre, and I played, I think, with a reggae band. And there was an audition I went, I think, on one day that I went to about 3 different bands that were playing electronic music, etc. So I sort of, you know, I just kind of gave myself chances to the mathematics of, like, you know, sort of quantity. But I do remember heavily getting into the Smiths. The Smiths seemed to me like the new Beatles, and I remember mentioning it to Jeff Travis, who became like integral to our career in the future. That I used to just have the headphones on, the cassette, the Sony Walkman, and my whole soundtrack was the Smiths.
Well, it's interesting because actually that was also my soundtrack for the 80s. And in a way, 83 to 87 was this kind of a glorious period, which I look at as indie pop, where suddenly all these bands, anybody who was roughly there, was just kind of like the June Brides, Yeah, No, you know, there was the Go-Betweens, the Triffids. I mean, hundreds of bands just suddenly, for 5 years, the Wolfhounds just had this kind of wonderful chapter, and it felt like it was just a glorious period, you know, for that 5-year period. And then suddenly 87 comes along, the Smiths break up, then that world of, you know, ecstasy, and there's another musical scene that starts, and it feels like all those bands are starting to go, yeah, we've kind of had our day, haven't we? And it's like, not completely, but there was definitely another wave of 16 to 18-year-olds who wanted their soundtrack. And often that's when a lot of those bands are thinking, do you want the 3rd album? 4th? No, not really. Okay, bye. So it's a cruel world, isn't it, really? So look.
And I'd add to that the Cocktail Twins, you know, of course.
Oh, God, yes. And Everything But the Girl. And
I seem to remember that being at a party in about 87 in Tufnell Park. And I experienced exactly what you're talking about. I was at the party and there was just drum beats and songs seemed to have disappeared, and I couldn't quite understand what was going on, you know, that sound of the 808, etc. And that seemed to be the moment for me, that personal turning point of where's the musicality, where are the songs, where, you know, where's it gone? There's something happening, but I don't know if I relate to it.
Yes. Well, I do remember one person I spoke to recently said he was dragged to a kind of one of these clubs, you know, like dance music, and someone shoved an ecstasy tablet in his mouth, and then he sort of like, it all changed from there. It was like, blimey, that was a bit shocking. But yes, I think that kind of had a big impact on a lot of stuff. But anyway, but before that excitement, so how did your sort of, because you were with Nick and before Kate joined, so you were in this band called ACT, weren't you, for a few years?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was like basically there was Mark Gilmore, Dave Gilmour's brother, in it, and that felt like a bit of a turning point because, you know, I liked what Nick was doing with all the kind of the 3-part harmonies, and then we had a drummer called Derek Adams, and we did some tours in Spain. The first time I think we went by van, and we had to have a carnet, which you need now, which is ironically enough all these bureaucracy and documents, which is just mind-blowing. I think we've gone backwards so much with Brexit. But we had some wonderful kind of, you know, bits of escape out of the kind of the austerity of Britain. And I think I remember, if sort of knowing myself, sometimes I guess I can be garrulous, and I can almost see myself in my visual memory of being lying on the floor at Gilmore's after we'd been rehearsing all day at night, and probably boring everyone in the band stupid, except for Nick, who seemed to listen to my crazy ideas about how the future could be. Yeah. So there was this weird kind of period where we kind of, I think Nick and I turned up to a gig and the bass player didn't turn up, and I think the guitar player didn't turn up, and then somehow it just sort of morphed into the two of us before Kate arrived.
Yes, blimey.
We had like backing tracks that we put together with Dave Gilmour, which was great fun. Yeah.
Blimey, my God, he had the minus touch for Kate Bush as well, didn't he? A few years before that.
Totally, and he had a Lindrum machine. I think there was only one in the country at the time besides him, and he had Peter Gabriel's Prophet, which I still remember playing on Please Please Let Me Get What I Want. I think our cover version.
My God. So amazing. Yes, Peter Gabriel in the 80s. So when did you, or how did Kate sort of become part of the band?
When I was in Southgate, I was on a permanent audition for various people. I remember having a girl called Lucy, I think, came to play the harp, and I had a sitarist. And every day I'd have different people in my living room kind of experimenting with different sounds. I think I was compensating for being at Dartington because we were all kind of spoiled brats in the middle of Devon, just being able to kind of spontaneously combust as dancers or musicians or artistically express ourselves. So to be kind of closeted in a small kind of, room and sort of house with other people in London, in North London, it was like a bit of a shock, actually. I think it took years for me to realise that, life wasn't like that. You weren't permanently at music college or art college, etc. Yeah.
Yes. And how did you manage to survive? Were you still at college at that stage, or were you sort of having to sort of...
No. I remember I was actually, when we came to sign our contract, I had to kind of sort of dump a children's theatre company. I was like touring around the country, sort of playing keyboards, and I think I ended up in Dundee or something. Yeah. bit of a hideous time, but yeah. But I survived. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And did you, when Kate appeared and there was the three of you, did it feel like, okay, everything, the planets have lined up, this is good, we've got something here?
Yeah. I mean, I love the sound of the oboe, and actually Nick found Kate. But I was totally into Ennio Morricone, and I felt that was another alignment as well, that the mission was around at the time. So on a sort of global level, the idea of the oboe or the anglais was in the ether. I don't know if you remember the film The Mission, but
was that with
it was integral to the soundtrack.
Yes,
I just remember the actor. Yes, exactly, the main actor. We should all know him, but the memories are fading.
It wasn't Robert De Niro, was it?
No.
Is it?
Yes, I think he might be in it, but there's another key actor that we should
know. And he's very British, I believe, isn't he? And does kind of emotional speeches, I believe. I can't.
Yeah, well, never mind. Fade of the memory. Yes, exactly. Forgive us.
Yeah. It was one of those. I mean, at that stage, probably Betty Blue hadn't come out, but did you ever get really obsessed with the Betty Blue soundtrack? I just wondered if that was kind of one.
I loved it. I loved the Betty Blue soundtrack. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Because that had that sort of, I don't know, was it a French composer that seemed to sort of take...
Yes, it's Gabriel Yared. Yeah, lovely composer. Yeah, he's done some really nice soundtracks as well.
Incredible. Yes, I know. We bought into Betty Blue with great, and then Diva, obviously. But yes. So then, once the band what was your memories of sort of then going into the studio for the first album? I mean, by then, this was like 84, 85, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, we've done some, had some good sort of run up or practice with Dave of realizing that the kind of technology and, not always using conventional drums. And also we were at Britannia Row, and the first single seemed to take about 9 months. We were in and out of different studios. So it was almost like we were practicing for the evolution of the new technology. I still remember being down at Genetic Studios, which was Martin Russian studio, where he recorded the Human League, and there was also General Public down there. So I had this big eureka sort of moment where there was a synclavier, and I printed out some music from it, and I thought, this is the future, not realizing, now it's kind of, de rigueur. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
But yeah, no, fantastic. Instruments and the Fairlight as well, the Fairlight and synclavier. And then there was also a place in Paddington, I think, that Peter Gabriel had sponsored, that was a shop where you'd be kind of looking through the shop window at the next bit of wonderful technology you can afford, like the emulator and the Fairlight, I think, which was about 28 grand or something.
Yes. Did you sort of feel like, where did you fit in with it all? Because you weren't on an independent label, and the mainstream was kind of very much that Trevor Horn production that had started with people like ABC and then Frankie, and then we had that kind of sound of, Dire Straits and Tina Turner. The charts were quite like, wow, harsh.
When you say we're not on an indie label, I mean, initially we were with Jeff Travis that had Rough Trade on Blanco and Negro, so he was the one that kind of gave us our kind of break, and then I think he took us to Warner's America.
Yes.
So they oversaw the project. But on that first album, I think that's my favourite, really, because there was just more room for artistic expression. And I think Joni Mitchell said you have the whole of your life to write your first album. And then normally people have a big problem with the second album because they haven't got much to say because they've been on tour promoting it. And I think that's what happened to us, basically.
Yes.
As well as the change of urban music, they call it, coming in 87. we were not ready. We're still pastoral kids, with lots of utopian ideals.
Because I did an interview with another guy who was in a duo called, is it Shelley Ann Orphan as well?
Shelley Orphan. Did an interview recently, because I actually looked him up recently and realised that he still lives in Bath, and I think he had a Japanese singer. But I remember like the lady that he used to work with, and unfortunately she died of cancer a few years ago.
Yes.
Her name, and yeah, I kind of adored what I remember Jeff playing their album with the strings. I think Anne Dudley did the string arrangements for them.
Luckily,
yeah.
I got a bit of a feedback there. Luckily, there was he had a very keen Italian fan who was also quite rich, who I think has financed his next album or financing it. So, yes, you can hear that interview on one of my shows. he explained, oh my God, he had a story which is just boggling, actually, one of the most horrendous stories I've ever heard. I will briefly tell you, but which is kind of fascinating to everyone listening. But he was driving to some recording studio at night, and there'd been a car crash. I think the person he kind of had been killed, and he'd sort of like had helped him out the car, and he had blood all over his kind of clothes and stuff, and then sort of eventually drove through the night and turned up at this kind of recording studio that they were working on with still this person's blood on them. And it was like, oh my God, that is the most horrendous story I've ever heard in my life. So, yes, there you go.
It sounds like a horror story. I remember that the singer was called Caroline, and I think she went out with the drummer from The Cure as well.
That's right.
Pre-Raphaelite hair.
Yes, and I think yeah. And there seemed to be a member in one of these bands called Boris, I remember. Anyway, God, look at us. Two people trying to remember. Yeah, but anyway, everything's good with him at the moment, and he's got some Italian helping him finance.
I must say hello to him, actually, because I love Bath, and sometimes I go out there because I find it almost my second spiritual home there. So,
yeah, but he was saying that they were crucified on all angles. I just wondered how the Dream Academy, how did you sort of get received from the music press and the public generally?
Well, looking at it, I mean, I guess we were blessed that we had the energy of the Warner's America. I mean, Nick reminded me, really, we had this video budget. The people that had got the money together for Aha, Take On Me, we were literally in the office and they were showing us what they'd done with that video. So we were at the right time, really, for MTV, and rather than kind of gigging up and down the roads like the Cult, who we met about a year later when we had our top 7 hit in the States, who looked like they'd been on the road and they sort of alcohol and all the kind of vices of the road had taken them over. And I thought, we're kind of lucky, really. We've kind of escaped that. But but there's also the balance that maybe if we'd have done some more gigs, that would have been a good thing as well. But the American public were amazing. I mean, just to have a British accent, and be. I remember a technician asking me to talk to his wife on the telephone just because I had a British accent. Everyone was really lovely, actually. Yeah, they
love it, don't they? They absolutely love the British accent. Do you live near London? Yes, I do.
Very good. Very good.
Well, trying to explain
next to the King, I should say.
Yeah. And then that's nice. That's good. So yes, how did Peter Buck appear on the album? I mean, with the track called The Party.
I think that was Nick's idea, and obviously, like with Warner's, and the kind of connection, like with Warner's America, it's quite easy, really. I mean, REM at one point, this is dedicated to the one I love. We were thinking, God, did they nick that idea off us? Who we'd nicked it off the Mamas and Papas? So there was a kind of integration going on there.
I've always loved. There was a lovely story with Elvis Costello recently, and someone pointed out that a young singer had just kind of really vaguely sounded like she had plagiarized one of his songs, and he said, "Well, I stole it from Bob Dylan, so I'm not that bothered." And it was like, "Oh, don't you want to sue them?" It's like, come on, who cares?
Yeah. No, I've got a couple of situations, major bands. I won't mention them. Yeah, I felt the same. I just thought it's just not worth it, is it? Life's too short.
It is too short. So then, because obviously your love of the Smiths comes through with Please Please Me, was that your idea?
No, it was actually Nick's idea, but as I was a Smiths lover, it was a very natural fit. Yeah.
Yes. So what was the atmosphere like with the band when you did your follow-up in 87?
The atmosphere. Well, to be honest, let's condense it. I feel that we suffered from second album sort of syndrome, and it was too elongated, and we didn't have, for me personally, we didn't have Dave Gilmour at the helm, who was like, the Floyd and the whole energy, and I guess that's why with Kate Bush it worked so well. I think we had Hugh Padgham, who wasn't a musician, and I think we missed that, having a musician at the helm. As Nick used to say, Dave was great because he was like a butcher. He'd say, get rid of that, because we'd be building these story tower blocks of sound. And I think we needed someone that had that integral musicianship to oversee what we were doing. And as a result, I think it lost its spiritual energy. I think, like, people talk about speaking the truth. I think we lost direction, I think, on the second album, personally. Yeah.
Yes. And were you feeling as well, because you mentioned a bit earlier, the kind of musical landscape was sort of shifting, and all the bands I had loved so much was sort of having that struggle with their second or third albums, thinking, there's suddenly, the dance scene with people like the Happy Mondays, Soup Dragons, had sort of done.
I think that was the major issue, I think, with the record companies. And then, as Nick said again, like Warner's, I think, were almost like United Artists, where several people had decided that the artists should have labels that would promote more than one album, rather than here you go, like, is it selling or not, you're dropped. So we were given that, blessing to do 3 albums. So they allowed us to go through that kind of that morphing of the culture and society. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of bands suffered from that.
Yes, it is. I mean, it is kind of. I was amazed, sort of being obsessed with Bowie. Sort of realising in the 70s he did 1 album a year, produced several people's, relocated, did world tours, and yes, and did a few films. And it's a bit like, I'm not quite sure how that happened, really. So. And neither did he.
Yeah, he definitely, his career definitely, didn't he? When he's getting into drum and bass and all sorts of stuff, some weird stuff, and it's almost, I don't know about you, there's certain albums that sort of hit the golden years of his albums, to kind of use the pun, and then there were ones that were kind of a bit amorphous, and we tend to remember the great songs and don't probably remember all that struggle. But then also, just as Jarvis Cocker said, it took him 17 years to break through. I mean, Bowie was 10 years of being obscure, wasn't he, in the 60s, before he actually got a break.
Yes.
So I guess, like a writer or any other artists, directors, I guess musicians aren't beyond that either, that we have to kind of go to the clouds to kind of get back to the sunlight or whatever. We have to experiment, and also there's the extrinsic things of society outside, as young artists must know now, with Brexit and COVID and potentially a third world war. I mean, wow, life is happening around these artists. It's not completely self-contained, is it? What your craft? And
no.
And myself as an artist, I realised, the piano was always a kind of therapy that I would play from the age of 10 as a form of internal expression. And I think with artists, and sometimes maybe they get beyond themselves, but it's almost like it's a little bubble, a little world that you're trying to create, an independent utopia that isn't subject to the external forces of culture and the real world, in inverted commas.
Yes. No, it's interesting because, the 80s did have a lot of struggle with, as I mentioned earlier, with all the political stuff that went on, and then various kind of crash and explosions, and financially, and then there was Chernobyl, and there was always that in the early 80s, that threat of nuclear war. And then sort of sometimes thinking about what the 90s was like, and it seemed it was quite casual in a way. There wasn't that sense of, it must have been issues and problems, but it didn't have those kind of, those things that I can remember. There wasn't artists sort of writing very angry songs about the political period. It was quite comfortable. I think people were just thinking it was kind of happy times in a way. I know that's really simplistic, isn't it? But
it's definitely kinder times, in inverted commas, from the cosmos. I think so. The planet wasn't in such jeopardy, was it?
No. So as we sort of had experienced the sort of the dance scene rise, and then we had the Seattle grunge scene, and then you think, right, third album, let's go, 91, the John Major years. What was it like then for you at that stage?
I love the way you say the John Major years. That's so funny, because I think of Spitting Image and the kind of grey peas, I think, and grey face. I immediately get a flashback to us doing our tour and setting off from Crouch End in the snow, and kind of doing a small tour. I think we had Guy Pratt and Gary from the Pink Floyd on the rhythm section, and we set out in the snow and kind of ended up in it's Glasgow, I think, King Tut's, where Oasis was discovered, I think, on that. And I think we almost went over some little precipice in a van, because it was slippery on the way. But so that's what I remember our tour. And then I think we ended up doing our final gig in London, and Dave came and played, guitar and stuff. So that was good fun. As for the album, I think we were kind of rediscovering the kind of the joy of recording and the kind of the color of music and sounds. And in a shame, it's a shame that we didn't go into a fourth album maybe 3 years later. I think that would have been quite good, because again, I think things were definitely opening out. Just when you think of the Bittersweet Symphony by the Verve and stuff and the music there, I think we'd have probably been in the right place again.
Yes, you would have. I think, yes, absolutely. I think there was a few bands who went, God, we should have just hung in there just a little bit longer, because no one kind of realised that kind of Britpop, everyone loving guitars. And also the festival scene had sort of come up quite big at that stage, the growth of festivals. Because I know Nick was he'd done his Isle of Wight experience when he was very young. Did you get into the 3-day festy scene?
Well, I was going to say very much, maybe not 3 days, but I went to where I was living in Somerset. I'd obviously go to like Stonehenge, and I went to the Reading Festival. And we had a place called the Johnson Hall that you'd have like Hendrix's bass player that played there, and a German band that were called Nectar, that were very psychedelic. So I definitely had my input of kind of bits of festival, and not as iconic as the Isle of Wight, but definitely understood it. Yeah.
Yes. So then when it came to that moment, when you were recording the third album, did you all know that was probably going to be the last kind of experience in the studio with the band?
Did we know? I think it was almost like we don't know the date that we leave this world. It's a gradual process, but it what can I say about that? It wasn't like we had. I personally didn't think that we had a blow away single. And also the zeitgeist wasn't necessarily in our favour, because I think we went to India and we did a cover of a John Lennon song, Love, and that was absolutely wonderful. We had 3 weeks, which was incredibly wonderful period to make a video, and very spoiled, and that was really joyous. But then the radio, because there was the Iraq War, I think, going on, basically banned things to do with love or anything that was sort of contradictory to the government policy of like, let's go and bomb them now. So we weren't in alignment with the government, let's say that. Yes,
blimey. Yes, so that was, God, you couldn't believe it. I know there was once a single that came out, about being, I don't know, I can't remember what it was. It was something like being at sea in a leaky boat. And I think that was when you had the Falkland crisis, and they thought, well, we can't have anything to do with leaky boats kind of on the radio.
Yeah, no, it's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? It's pretty mind-blowing, yeah.
It's a bit like,
that felt very sad at the time to think it, I mean, Lennon's, original version of Love is absolutely beautiful. And I think we gave it a bit of justice. And there's a video out there, I don't know if you've ever seen it, of our little messing about in India. But I think we did a bit of justice to his absolutely beautiful song, and the world vision, utopian. Yeah.
Yes. So then did you all just have a moment you sat down and said, this is the end, to quote Jim Morrison?
Well, it was also financial, because having financial responsibility of a mortgage and stuff like that. So I was like thinking, well, what's going to happen next? And that's when I kind of got together with Rachel Ayres, Kevin Ayres' daughter. I don't know if you know Kevin Ayres from
yes,
and Mike Oldfield, etc. So then I started putting my own project together, and Kate hadn't really committed herself to anything particular, and things were drifting. But as a musician, just like other people in the world, you have to earn a living. So it's like, where's the money coming from?
Yes, I know. It's one of those classic. So then, have you had a life still in music, doing bits and pieces?
Very much. God.
So what happened? So you work with, did you say Kevin Ayres' daughter?
Yeah, Rachel Ayres. Yeah,
Rachel. And what project was that?
That was there's a song out there called England's Dreaming, which is all about the political situation, actually, anti-Thatcher, that I put out there, so you can check it out. And also another one called The Colour of Love, which was directed by the Raincoats lady. I forgot. You probably know the Raincoats one.
Yeah, God.
So there was that, and no, there's been endless sort of projects since then. I've been working with a guy called Thomas Kukurba in Poland, because I lived in Poland. I moved there in the 2000s because I'd had enough of Pop Idol. I thought, if this country is coming to that, then why do I want to even be in England? And I've made some really sort of eclectic stuff, and I'm doing a new project now. When I can see that you're being logical about the decades, just like myself, so I don't want to disrupt your chronology. If you want me to go on to it, it's funny you're doing it chronologically, because I've just been working on a project celebrating Dartington College of Arts, which is another story about, basically it was a rich heiress that bought the place in 1925 with a husband to escape the pandemic and war 100 years ago. So I'm doing a spatial project to celebrate the centenary in 2025, because we've just had a pandemic and we're on the verge of another war. So I'm very interested in the idea of communicating about utopia, ideals, community, and all the things that I think we all need to when there's such a disarray.
Yes,
that's a longer conversation.
I know. Yes, living in community was quite the thing in the 60s and 70s. I sort of remember it in the 80s. I think that was driven slightly by a certain lack of money and poverty, but also a shared value of sort of being for something while being against stuff.
Now it's just poverty, isn't it? Forget about the community.
It's just like, yeah, I know. God, my mum said something the other day. She said, I might do some baking and put it in the freezer because the electricity will be so much more expensive, after.
It's medieval, isn't it? The whole thing that's going on. It's just and quite feudal as well, actually. Yeah.
Yes, I think it will be. So just briefly, The Colour of Money. Colour
of Love.
Colour of Money, right?
Colour of Love. The Colour of Money is a film, I think, but I certainly wouldn't do that. The Colour of Money. No, that wouldn't be.
No. So then, so just briefly, what was your 90s? You mentioned Rachel and doing England's Dreaming. What else happened?
Lots of study. I was at Goldsmiths University, then I studied film at Westminster University, and then I completed a doctorate as well. So I was always studying, playing music, new technology, and left London, I think, in 1997. And then Dario G, to our good fortune, sampled Life in Northern Town, which I think sold 2 million records.
Blimey.
Luck. Blimey.
That was a bit like that, wasn't it? I did an interview with Dunstan Bruce from Chumbawamba, and it was like, they were so like, thank God for tub thumping. We don't have to go and work on, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a warehouse for Amazon somewhere. We can vaguely retire to a little, flat somewhere and just about survive if we're sensible, and eat lots of TVP. So that would be good. So yes. Yeah. So after the 90s, now we're into the new Labour years, Team Tony. What happens in the next decade, the O years?
Well, that's when I was saying that I decided to go to Poland. I lived there for about 6 years, and I was doing a lot of music in Krakow, like theatre, and recording with this guy, Kukuj, Thomas Kukurba, who played with Peter Gabriel and what's his name, Nigel Kennedy. So I did a project called Another Sun, and I also had a band called Melt 21 as well. So I was imagining that there was still a potential for interacting with the music business when I kind of got back to the UK, not realizing that it really basically dissolved in essence because of the internet and downloading, which again is another cultural external that artists, musicians, and etc. probably weren't prepared for.
No, absolutely. And then occasionally, do the members of Dream Academy, do you occasionally have the odd concert together just for old time's sake?
Well, Nick organised a concert in Japan, but didn't tell me, which was a little bit shocking. And I did a gig in Youth Space Mountain Festival about 2017, and that was very kind of them to let me play. And then I ended up doing some sort of smaller gigs down here, and I played in Croatia as well. And I've seen Nick in the last 3 months or whatever a few times. and said, you know, basically life doesn't go on forever, and maybe we can make our best album now, but who knows if that's going to happen.
Yes, because Kate still plays music, doesn't she?
I think she's doing some like folky stuff, and I think she might have done a bit of film music. I haven't seen her appear on Facebook much recently, but I think she's got a daughter that's left, you know, gone to university, etc.
Yes.
A dog.
So are you still sort of have that sort of not dream, but sort of idea that you might sort of one day think, let's just do one more for the road?
Well, I think Nick's probably hedging his bets of what, you know, where the money's coming from, because I think he's got like expenses with the studio and stuff, and it's that kind of time in life. I was like reading some philosophical thing on the internet today. I don't know why I get philosophy sort of thrust on me, but you know, it's just talking about as you have less years left, then you know you should be kinder to other people, and you maybe should be a bit more decisive how you want to use your life. And I guess Nick, I think he left school, I don't know, when he was 14 or 15, and he didn't go the conventional route of education like I did. So I think in some ways that he's been picking up on it. He's been learning the piano and German, and you know, maybe he's done his innings, you know, of like being on the road, etc. Because it is a sacrifice when I see lots of these bands, you know, like physically and mentally. I mean, there's a wonderful documentary by Aha. I was trying to get Nick to watch. I don't know if you've seen it, Aha, the movie. I mean, that is a mind-blowingly brilliant documentary of what it's like to be in a band. You realise that, you know, they've got this naturally charismatic, you know, wonderful-looking singer, but the other two are really talented, and they end up doing film music. They split up, they have crisis, etc. And then I think one of them has a heart condition towards the end, and they realise that we're brothers and we'll do this gig and we'll keep it together. So there's a splitting up, the getting together. Their first record, like just like Bowie, you think, first album, I think, sold 11 million.
Yes.
Which is just mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing. I mean, those record sales are credible. No, I didn't know there was a film on Aha.
I really I saw it on Sky Arts, and I just thought, wow, this is amazing. It's, you know, just really interesting, because you just think of Take On Me, and that's it, don't you? But not the rest of it. Yeah.
I did hear an acoustic version of that recently, and it was a bit like when I listened to a Joni Mitchell album a few decades ago now, where she'd redone her material from the 70s, and it was much more melancholic and much sadder. It felt very heavy. And
that singer has this inherent sort of sadness, and I think it's the other two guys that write a lot of the songs, but he just has this kind of charisma of being like some kind of vulnerable bird or something. You know, that would head rabbit in the spotlights and all these kind of cliches, and somehow he's there and he's got this gift, and it's really a great documentary.
Yes, well, I will check that. I didn't even know that exists. I've seen as many as I can, so there you go. I mean, if there was anything that you could have told your 16-year-old self starting out, is there something you would have just whispered in their ear and said, look, I would definitely do this?
What
or
would
not?
I say? What was I? That's a really difficult question, actually, because I'm going through a sort of a circumstance now, like with a situation, and I realised that you either are forthright and you tell the truth, or you compromise your ideals. And I think, you know, all the people that I respect, whether it's Joni Mitchell or, you know, philosophers, etc., because the establishment that I went to is pretty mind-blowing. Dartington College of Arts or Dartington Hall. You know, it had Huxley, it had Bertrand Russell, Ravi Shankar, you know, just amazing thinkers. There's a guy called Satish Kumar that walked 8,000 miles to get Bertrand Russell out of prison and to protest about the caste system in India. You know, 8,000 miles without a passport, without any food, with a fellow. He just decided that's what I'm going to do. And I just thought, those are the people that I respect. And I think, you know, as we're all on a deathbed, I think, is it Marcus Aurelius is talking about that your whole life is to have that good thought when you die. So I don't think I've wittingly betrayed anybody or been dishonorable or kind of, you know, been dishonorable. So I don't know, you know, I guess you deal with what the cards that you've decided to choose from the pack. I almost want to ask you the same question. Get a small answer.
Well, I suppose sometimes it's to have that conversation which you feel just to know. I suppose it's often around the world of money, isn't it? Actually, and sort of and what you're really signing up to, and not just assume that everyone's having a good feeling and we're all going to act honourably at the end of it. You know, just in case. It's like what happens when things start to get a little bit difficult. And if you haven't had that conversation, then you don't really know the parameters or the structure. You know, things can get a bit odd, and people don't always act as you expect. So I think, yeah, there was a certain hippie naivety or new agey naivety that I had, which I would definitely have I have lost in later life, you know, because it's just like, no, I suppose that sense of naivety that, you know, just thinking everybody's going to do the nice thing if they're in a situation, and they can, you know, I've met people who wouldn't do the nice thing. They both would like to stab you and quite get a kick off it as well. So protecting oneself from those situations, yeah, would be a lot better. So yeah.
So I think that's I think that's very, very good. It's weird actually, because my sister had a brain tumor and died when she was 50, and she was talking about that had some, you know, like kind of alternative therapy, and it was like having this kind of not force field but a cloak that could protect you. So you're absolutely right. It's like maybe the development of that is something, and I think maybe that's parental responsibility or lack of it that probably both yourself and myself didn't have totally, as well as being into the era that was more open planned and more visionary. I mean, I've seen documentaries about prog rock, etc., and they were saying in the 60s, if we saw what happened, we'd be so disappointed. You know, we went to the moon, we did all these amazing things, and we imagined the future was going to be much more interesting and much kinder in a way, you know, more evolved, and actually they're kind of shocked. So I guess I represent your analysis of yourself and wonder if it's the environment that you're brought up in, because you were brought up in a more optimistic kind of more embracing communal environment, and the world seems to have become a bit harder and
Yes.
selfish. And I always, when I think of selfies, I always think of the word selfish, selfishies. You know, it's got the word, most of it's in there already.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, I think, I suppose a few decades ago, I suppose we were having to get our kind of wheels sorted out, and talking to our chap, who was just a nice guy, nicest guy I've ever met, really. He seemed so relaxed and casual about it. But he said that in that business of what he does, he said that he's never, you know, he's seen the worst in anybody. If they realise that legally they could keep all the money, even though it's been verbally said, oh no, you know, I would split it, they never do. And I think it's that sense of like, oh right, so you can still be light and optimistic but just not have that naivety. I think that's the thing, because yeah, you'll get disappointed if you sort of go with it too long. So I think that sense of it, but I do like to feel still optimistic about life, even though it can sometimes be a bit tricky.
It's so funny you're talking about optimism. I mean, this is like synchronicity. I happened to notice, and I'm not always looking at Facebook, and it was philosophy again, and someone was going about, oh, optimists build aeroplanes and pessimists build parachutes. And then there was a whole conversation, because life cannot be that simple, because there's an optimism to believe your parachute's going to work as well. You know, they were trying to sum it up. You know?
Yes, it's interesting. But look, well, thank you ever so much for this. This has been amazing. If you want, I can always send you the link, and you can always use it or not use it. I don't know, and it's fine. But it's good.
David, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you and to unearth the deep recesses of my mind, memory, and lack of memory.
Yes, well, it's all there. It's all there. But yes, that's all good. And like you said, yeah, don't do. I shall on the subject of alternative medicine, which I got kind of into when I was younger. But the lead singer of that band, Shelley Ann Orphan, I was talking to the guy, and he said that she spent too many years kind of doing alternative stuff. So when she went to the doctors eventually, it was like, actually, it's too late now. But you kind of should have come to us a bit earlier. That, you know, so.
Well, yeah. No, I'd be the first not to say alternative medicine is a substitute for, you know, reality. but on a psychological level, if there are means where you can kind of protect yourself, whether it's playing the piano or being theatrical or expressing yourself rather than popping pills that have been prescribed.
Yes.
Suggest yes.
Go for it.
Away ye anti-vaxxers.
I know. On that bombshell. Look, thank you ever so much. Look, take care and have a lovely afternoon.
All right, take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, just in case you didn't know, it's the end of the interview. I know, shame. But fantastic all the same. Thank you ever so much, Gilbert Gabriel from the Dream Academy, for giving me the time for that interview. This has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show, you'll find it. Also, keep it positive, keep it groovy, keep it nice. And all these interviews have been archived. Aren't you lucky? You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.